Okay, so what we're going to do is, this was our environment as it was to this point. You've got the robot that's making its ways around. You've got a player that can wander around. You had just using the one controller, and you had a jump button with this. And the robot goes and hides, and then when you find it, it starts to work again. So what we're going to do in this, though, is we're going to now make this multiplayer, because obviously that's the goal for that one project. So to do that, if you're following along, what we want to do in your scenes folder is I'm going to make a new one. We're going to make a new scene, or we're going to actually duplicate our sample scene. So the sample scene is what we built everything under, unless you rechanged it yourself. We're just going to duplicate that, and we'll rename this. I'm going to rename it a little different because I have other versions of it here. We're going to call it co-op scene. That's what you should call it. I'm going to call it co-op scene 1 because I already have one. And we're going to go ahead and pop into the new co-op scene. You can verify that it's co-op scene. It'll say it up here at the top of the hierarchy. And then we're going to want to add to your hierarchy an empty game object. Because what we need to do is we need to create a player manager. We need something that's going to manage the players throughout this. Since we're going to have 2 now. Or you might possibly decide to go more. We're going to go ahead and duplicate in our scene. We're going to duplicate our player twice. And then we're going to change the name. Come on. Get up here then. To split player. So that'll be a split screen for that one. And we'll call this one co-op player.
Just both duplicates of the player?
Yep, they're just both duplicates of the player. We're going to reuse as much of this as we can and then just modify as we go. In the co-op player, we want to go ahead and remove the camera from the player because we're going to do a shared camera for the co-op. So think couch co-op where you're just using one screen, one camera for everybody. So we can't have 2. And then in the split player, what we want to do is we want to find the camera, but we want to turn the audio listener off. Because with the split player, we're going to do a split screen with those. And you can't have multiple audio listeners in the same scene. It will bitch at you. So we're just going to go ahead and turn it off. And then we're going to add the split player and the co-op player to our prefabs folder. What? The camera for the co-op player, you're just going to go ahead and remove it from underneath because it was attached to the player. So we're just going to remove it. The split player, you're just going to the camera and turning off the audio. So then we're going to take our split player, our co-op player, and we're going to go ahead and I need to make them different numbers. I'm going to add 1s to the end of mine because I want to keep them separate. And we're going to go ahead and add those to our prefab folder. So they are now prefabs, so we can bring them in as needed. And then we're going to delete all the players from the scene. You'll notice that you have in our scene a spot where the player was, right? This is that empty spot. We can go ahead and fix that by going to our floor and clearing it for a second under the nav mesh surface and then bake it and then that fills in that circle. Otherwise, if you don't, the robot will never go there, or no AI will be able to go into that spot, which we don't really want. All right. Then we're going to go to our scripts folder, which is somewhere. And we're going to want to create some new C# scripts. We're going to do a split. Ooh, split player controller. Once again, I'm going to name mine 1 because I already have one in here. But just call your split player controller. Then we're going to want to add another script. We're going to call it the co-op player controller. And a final one for the moment, and we're just going to call it player manager. All right, so we've got 3 new scripts. We're just going to save time, and we're going to add the player manager script to our player manager game object that we just created, because it's going to eventually go there. All right, first off, we are going to do the split screen game. So we're going to go ahead and open our split screen player controller script that we just did. So we've got that ready. I'm going to close a few of my other ones. So we don't need these. I think that's good for the moment. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and come down to our, we should have, close this one too. So in the My Controls player input, our input actions, My Controls that we created last time, what we're going to want to do is go ahead and make sure we want to edit the control scheme for this. So we want to, for it, we're going to add a gamepad to it. So into your controllers and the input actions, because we had previously with it made it so that you can, everything's changed because I've been working on this. So you've got your all control schemes. We want to add a control scheme. We're going to call it, this is where you would call it gamepad. I can't do, so I'm just do gamepad 1. We're going to add that it's a gamepad. To it, that it's required for you to use that gamepad. Save it. I've gotten to the habit now, instead of having to remember to hit save asset, I've just turned on autosave. Just makes life so much easier, because it's like, wait, why does that not work? Oh yeah, because I haven't saved it yet. So this is just going to do it on its own. No, just a gamepad. Yep, just a gamepad itself. I'll add another one. So you're going to go control scheme, gamepad, this will be 2. And then add under list empty, hit the plus. You're going to select the gamepad, and then gamepad is up on top. we're just going to select that gamepad and make it required. Then we can select our new gamepad. If you go into it, it's going to leave it as all devices. You can switch it to gamepad. It's not going to change anything here. But it's going to bring in everything that we've done previously, but it's not going to be connected. So if we click on move, it's just like, hey, yeah, you got to move. That's pretty cool. So we have to go back through and connect just like we did previously. So for move, we're going to add the up, down, left, right composite. Once you do that, it's going to bring up. For some reason, now it's like, oh yeah, I do realize that you have something like this. Isn't that neat? So what we can always do is just come up to the one that we've done previously and go ahead and select use it in that control scheme. So we don't have to duplicate it, but it just doesn't turn it on until you're like, hey, I want to do something new. And it goes, oh, there is something here. I found something. Isn't that neat? So just go through all the ones, switch all your 2D vectors to also be attached to your gamepad. So it should be cool controls and gamepad on all those for your 2D vector. I'm just going to delete the other one because we don't need it. We're going to do the same thing for jump, which should now be like, oh yeah, I do know what we're looking for. And so once again, add it to the button south, should be added to your gamepad. We're not going to worry about shoot or quit today. And we might as well, while we're here, let's go ahead and we're going to add a new action, or you're going to add a new action. So once again, you'll hit the plus next to actions. This would be for you, it would be look. I'm going to call it look 2. Because we want to, it was great to be able to move around the screen in our previous control setup, but it really didn't allow for great movement. So we want to switch rotation to strafe. And then we're going to add looking around to the right joystick. So what you want to do in your look is you're going to, like we did before, we're going to add, where are you? Because I've got it a button. Want to switch it to pass through like we did before. Control type goes to any. And then with that, we get our up, down, left, right composite. We're going to set it up for this. We won't make use of the up, down in this, but we're just going to set it all up anyway. So if you open up your look, you add the, once again, the up, down, left, right composite. It gives you this 2D vector. That's what we want. When you, is your action type pass through? Yep. So that, well, as soon as you change the pass through, you will get the up, down, left, right composite. And so with that, when you go in, now you're up, no binding. Remember, we're just going to click on the path. I did find, if you have a controller attached, so if you don't have a controller attached, just through the gamepad, you're going to go down and you're going to go to the right stick. And for up, you'll put up. For down, you'll put down, right? The other thing that you can do if your controller is attached, yep.
Will we just be looking up the like rotation on the like a horizontal?
Yeah.
No, like kind of like looking up and down.
Not a full. So if you wanted to implement that into it going further, that would be what you could use the up down in the look for. But for just this, we're just gonna look. Basically, just cause it to be able to spin.
Okay.
If you needed.
I don't think I ever had look on my original draft.
You wouldn't have. We're adding it brand new.
Okay, then the 2D vector stuff, it's not popping up.
So you're not getting a 2D vector?
I already did the rotate thing when I was so like it's like just make it rotate fast. I'm just gonna make it rotate. I'm not the only one there's that. Oh, mine did 3D framework. Yeah.
For the right stuff. Okay, so what you can do for that, you can go through and through your gamepad, you can go ahead and select them directly, or if you have your controller attached, you can just click up here in the top blank bar. It says it's listening, and then you just actually enter what you want to enter on your gamepad. And so that's going to pull up. It knew it was an Xbox controller, so it's going to give me my options, and then I can just click on the right stick up. And then you can repeat that for all of your inputs. So there's two different ways to do it. Sometimes scrolling through it's kind of a tedious factor, so just being able to be like, oop, boop, there we go, done.
That box added to have the listener hold on?
Yep. So when you go into your path, you need to go back one from, or you just basically click on that top bar. So anywhere up here on that top bar above the list is going to give you the listener, and then it's just make the input or a button. And the more you add to it, it's just going to keep going, which might make it a little confusing and chaotic. So you can just hit escape and then go back and like, okay, I really wanted the X button, or whatever you want it to be. All right, so we're just going to, let me update mine. Down. Of course, now it's not going to work. There we go. Down. Left. And I can't count the number of times where I enter left twice. And then they're like, yeah, I'm going to go left and right at the same time. All right. And then make sure you have in the control scheme, making sure that each one of these ones that you just did is connected to the control scheme that you have just made. Because you now should have multiple control schemes. So make sure that it's at least attached to that. If you want to, it's perfectly good to add it to all of them, as long as it's not getting in the way of anything that you're doing. Okay. We will now. So I learned something new as I was working through this, which is kind of cool, which makes me like input actions even more. We have access to these in a really simple format, which is great. So if we come over to our scripts, the split player controller, I'm gonna delete my start. You could leave it if you want. We'll leave update because we will use that. But if we just do a public void capital O on capital J jump, because it's going to be attached to our player where we have our input system, it's going to automatically listen for our jump.
Wait, where's that again?
So this is in our controller scheme, but if we go to our code and we just do public void on jump, it's now going to listen for our jump input. It's gonna be like, oh, hey, cool. I hear you push that jump input button. And it'd be like, okay, now let's do what's in there. So it saves a lot of time digging through, especially something like jump, right? It's just gonna basically jump, right? We're not doing anything crazy with it. So we don't need to go through and run a whole bunch of lines of code. This is just gonna be like, oh, hey, you hit the jump button. That's neat. And run what's in there. And so if you want to have a list of that, if we go to our prefabs, our split player controller, if you look on our, it should have the player input attached to it. And if you look right down here, I'm assuming it's going to be impossible to read on the screen, but on your screen, underneath the send messages or behavior, it's going to send, it tells you it's going to send messages to the on move, which move we have, an on jump, an on shoot, an on quit, an on look. Well, and mine now says an on look too. So it tells you and makes it clear, like, okay, you have those functions. It's going to like send those immediately to that function, which is really nice and simple. All right, we're going to go ahead and so we'll add that in there. We'll play with it in a bit. We're going to add a new variable to it, or copy it from another one, a private Boolean, game started, and I'll explain why we'll do this in a minute. We're going to set that to false. So the game technically hasn't started yet. And then we want to add, we can add it under jump, on jump. It's going to be like that today. We're going to add a new private void place player. All right, and then what we're going to do into our on jump, we're going to say if is better, exclamation point. So the exclamation point, if you remember, it means not in a Boolean. So if we put a Boolean after this, if game started is false, is not true because the exclamation point, we're going to run something here. So basically, the reason for this is our on jump button is the A button, is what we have it set up to be. In your game, the A button might be shoot, it might be roll, whatever it ends up being, right? The problem is the way that Unity sets up the multiplayer for you to log in with a controller, it's the A button. So it's going to go to on jump no matter what. So for this, we want to not have our player jump right at the start. We want to just actually load that player. So we're going to the first time that jump gets pressed, so A gets pressed, it's going to go through the game started setup. And then every time, we're going to set it to true, the game has started. And then every time after that, it's just going to do the jump function. All right. Was you. We want to then actually go ahead and open, we can save this for a moment. We want to open our, we're going to bump around a bunch of scripts today. We want to open up our player manager scripts. And here we're just going to start by adding a variable, which is going to be private integer number of players, and we're going to set it to 0. So currently, at like the moment the game boots up, and we haven't pushed to start the player yet, there are no players. So we want to make it clear that there are no players at the moment. For this one, we're going to be simple. We'll remove the start and update because we're just going to use this for some information. We're going to add a function. It's going to be public because we want to be able to call this from other scripts. So public, we're going to return an integer. And we're going to call this check total players with a lowercase o, total players. And then within this, all we need to do is return number of players. So all we're doing with this is if this gets called, hey, how many players are currently in the game? We can get that piece of information. And that's what it's sending back. And then what we want to also do is public. This time it'll be a void, add a player. We're going to get to greater depth on this one later. So we're adding a player. We're just going to increase the number of players. So number of players plus plus semicolon. When we add a new player to the game, we need to add one to that value. So when you hit the A button, we're going to call this and say, hey, add a player, please. So we can save this. Go back to our split player controller scripts. And so in this one, we're going to add another variable because we want to keep track of things here as well. We're going to do a private private integer. And this, we just want to know for this script, what player number is it attached to? So this is going to track, is this player 0? Is this player 1? This could be player 37, depends upon how many players you're going to have in your game. And then in our place player, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to create a variable. We're going to call it PM, which is going to be short for player manager. So we want to do GameObject.find. And then make sure it's in quotes, player manager. Needs to be spelled the exact same way that your player manager is spelt in the hierarchy. And so we want to then, we'll use, oops, I want this lowercase because I'm trying to get used to it. We want to go ahead and have our player number is going to equal, and this is where we're going to call out to the player manager. We want to get the component, not integer. We're going to get the component player manager. For me, it's 1. For you, just player manager. And we want to run check total players. Right, so we just created the function in player manager, which is check total players, which just spits out an integer. And so in here, we created our integer for player number. And we're saying, hey, I need to know the player number. Is this the first player to join in, or is this the third player to join in? Which will spit back out automatically from that. We don't want our players to start on top of each other. That's kind of an awkward gameplay situation. So we're going to add a switch statement here, and it's going to be based off of the player number. So player number is going to be always an integer. So we can have this be case 0. So 0 being the actual number. This could be, if we were storing it as a string, this could then be in quotes, player 1, depending upon how you're saving it. But we're just saving it as an integer. And the first player comes out as 0. So we're going to have case 0. We're going to transform the position to a new vector 3. And for this case, we're going to make it -5, 1, 0. So that's going to move our player to that location. So basically from where we had it before, just a little bit to the left. Yes.
Couldn't you also make like public variables and have predestined
Yeah.
like spawn locations?
100%. Yeah. If you're like, I want it to be player 1, you're going to get this.
Just that way you don't have to be calculating the X, Y, and Z and being like, oh yeah.
Exactly. And what you can also, you can do it the same way we did the destinations for the robot AI. You can do the exact same thing and say, this is where I want you to start. The player 1, you're starting here. Player 2, you're starting there. If you could get more complicated, you could have like 4 or 5 locations and have it randomly pick one. And then for the next player that joins, check and see if a player's there or not. And if there is a player there, then pick another random number. So yeah, you can 100% do it that way. For this, it's just a quick, easy. I want them starting next to each other. So, but 100%. And then for being able to track some other things, having the name set of that player is sometimes really nice. If we did it just this way, it would come up as split player clone. And then if we bring another one in, they're going to also be split player clone. So for me, I didn't think that was the greatest. It does work in certain situations. And this, it's going to be nice to actually have a player name because we are checking that from the robot, right? The robot was checking player as the name, which we're going to get to in a minute because everything changes with this. So what we're going to actually do, we're going to say this, which is talking about the this game object, so the game object that this code is attached to, and name, and we're going to change the name to player 1. So now we have a nice, easy way to refer to that player by name, which is may or may not be helpful. And then if we don't do this, I'm going to do this game object again. We're going to get a component. It's going to be the renderer. And we're going to change the material and the color of it to color.blue. And then to end a case, we need to end it with a break. That's all the code we're going through. Okay, stop going through the switch statement. We're done. And then I'll move on to the next code. So what this is going to do is when player 1 starts, whoever player 1 is, they're going to be assigned to the left side, and they're going to get the color blue. And so we're going to do basically the same thing for case 1. Player, because we don't start with a number, we start at 0. You could start at 1 if you want, but 0 tends to be the way things are. It's just a good habit to get into. Refer to the first thing in the list as 0, which still takes my brain half a moment to think about. So in this case, player 2 is going to be player number 1. Just because it's the second one, first one starts at 0. So we're going to do another case. We're going to move this one. I'm going to guess you can see where this is going. New vector 3. We're going to make it 5, 1, 0. So this is going to move a little bit to the right of center. This game object name is going to be player 2. This game object get component render material color. I mean, it doesn't matter if you do it a different color. I'm gonna make mine red. And then once again, we close it with a break. If we ended up having a third player, a fourth player, right? We can just keep adding case statements and move them wherever the hell we want to. And so we bop out of that. When we break, it just breaks out of the switch. So we're going to continue the code and say, okay, you've now made these changes to the player. Let's go ahead and have our player manager get component player manager make sure I do my right ones. Player manager 1, add player. And we set our game started to true. So what this is going to do, it's going to go through, it's going to grab that, what's the current player number, right? It's going to start at 0. It's going to go up from there. It's then going to make some decisions and changes based off of what player number it gets. And then, because you've added a player, we're going to send add player back to the player manager in add player so that it automatically increments to now 1. So then when the next player starts, it gets player number 1. The next player starts, it gets 2. And then we say, okay, from now on, you're all good. We're not going to go through the game started again here on jump. So if you hit A again, we're now going to do our jump. All right, save that. Pop back to Unity. We're going to go to our prefabs. We're going to click on our split player. I'm going to minimize a couple of these. We can actually get rid of our player controller script because we're going to create a new one for that. So you can go ahead and remove components. We'll keep the rigid body. The material doesn't matter because that now changes as needed. And so we're going to go ahead and you can do it through add component, split player controller. Script to it because that's where we're going to be doing all our movement through that. All our control movement is going to happen through there. Then we want to, while we're here, we're back out. Might as well do it while we're here. Come over to your player manager. We're going to add another component to that. We good? Cool. No worries. All right. So in our player manager, we have our player manager script on there, but we need to also add the player input manager. So the player input manager is amazing what manages the players. How they come up with these names, I don't know. So, and in this, we're going to have a joining behavior. So how do you actually join? Does a player join the game? We're going to leave it at when button is pressed, but you can have it when an action is triggered. You can have it joining the players manually. We're going to stick with button is pressed. We're going to add, because we have it now, our split player prefab to the player prefab. So when you push the button, it's going to go, I know which prefab player you want. You want this one. So it's going to load the split player 1, which once again is why if you don't change the name, it's just going to show up as split player clone, which is not what we want for that. Join enabled by default. That's great. We are going to limit our players to 2. And for this version, because it's the split screen, we're going to enable split screen. And you can go through if you want to. It's going to have a bunch of little changes you can make to the split screen style. We're just going to leave it as it is. We don't need to make any changes for this. All right. So technically, now if everything goes according to plan, we should be able to press play at this point. All our bullets just showed up. So, but if I hit the A button, I now have a player. And if I hit the A button on the other controller, of course it's not going to work. Where is our problem? I never test this on the laptop. That might be the first problem. Player manager as our player manager script. Split player has our split player. So if we go back to our split player, we want to make sure, yeah. We want to set our default scheme to gamepad. And we want to turn auto switch off. Auto switch allows it to basically switch to whatever controller is being used at the moment, which is great for a single player game that you want to have multiple controllers for. But in this case, we're doing a multiplayer game. We don't want to keep passing back and forth what controller works for what. Yep, don't worry about those. We will address the robot in a moment. All right, let's see if that solved our problem. There we go. We have split screen. All right, we're done. No, I wish. We have so much more to do. But we have the ability to be there. All right, so as noted, the robot has been spitting out, mine didn't show, technically tons of errors. That's why mine's not showing up. So what we want to do is, what we had done with our robot was just have it go after player, right? It was looking to see, is what I hit player. We now no longer have anything called player in our environment. We have player 1 and player 2, right? And so what we can do is go into our robot code, into robot state controller. Let me open that one up. Scripts. State machine. Robot state controller. What we want to do is, like we need to, whenever we're working with the state machine in our state controller, everything is public, right? Because everything's grabbing and interacting with that. So we're going to go ahead and add, I've already added it to mine. We're going to add a public void. It's called set player. It's going to be a game object because that's what the player is. We're just going to use P as the variable to represent what that is. This being in here is going to require, when we access this function, that we're passing in a game object. If we don't pass in a game object, it's going to bitch and complain. So we got to be able to do that. And so we're just going to then set whatever gets tossed into here. Our player that we've been using previously, right, is now going to be whatever player it is. We're going to set it to its player 1. Is going to be the owner of the robot. That's the one that can make it work. Or when it's hiding from that player, it's going to go to sleep. So then because of that, we want to go into robot working and make a small change. Cool. No, you're good. So in working, we're going to make a small change to our check transition. So we're going to add to it an if-else statement. So if you want to do if rsc.player equals null, so the player doesn't get set until a player joins the game. So at the beginning of the game, there's no player there, right? So we're going to have a part of this that's going to see, is there no player? And if there's no player, we're going to automatically transition to robot is sleeping. So the RSC set state, new robot sleeping RSC. So it's basically going to say like, oh, there's nobody here. The owner's out of the house. I'm taking a nap. I don't need to work. And then into the else after that. So if there actually is something in player, we're going to put in all the code that we had previously with one change. So you can just copy paste it into the else. But what we're going to do instead of, because this used to be checking if the hit collider and the object of that name was just player, we want to now go to and reference the player game object name that we now are setting in the state controller. So now we don't have to specifically say, oh, player, we had specifically been saying this can only be player and we only care about player. Now this could be player 1, player 2, player 37, whatever it wants to be. We have that ability to now make this variable. And then we're going to do the same little piece of change to the robot sleeping. Which we just basically for robot sleeping, we want to just make sure that player is not null. And we're going to go, did we make any changes to this? What did I do? Yeah, that's basically it. We're just going to make sure the player's not null. It's only going to change if there's an actual player there. So as long as there's a player, that's when we'll actually look and see if a player has approached us. If there's no player, sleep on, my dear robot, sleep on. All right. So then what we want to do is we're going to go back. Everybody go to this point. Yep. So this is where you could have technically another state, right? This robot state, nobody's home. And it could be having a dance party. You could have the robot like thrashing the place, right? So you can then do some other creative weird shit from that. Depending upon the game that you're trying to create, what makes sense. Are we good? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go back to the split player controller and into our case 0 at the bottom of it. So right above the break, we're going to go ahead and add the line game object find body. That's our robot. Probably should eventually change that to robot, but it's fine. Oops. We're going to get the component robot state controller set player, because that's what we just did, and we're going to send in this game object. So now we're tying into what we just created in the robot state controller, which is this function here where we set the player. Remember, we're asking for a game object, and then it's assigning that game object to what the player is going to be. So that's why we've got, no, bad, stop. Sending this player, this game up to fill in that player spot. If you wanted the second player to own it, this code would just go to player 1 or into case 1. If you wanted it to be random, which one, you could then check and see, send it out to a function that just sees like Does this match the number you're looking for? Do a random one. If yes, then cool, you have it. Then you say like, hey, the robot's now been assigned. We can't assign it again. All the way down until like, oh, last player. Now you automatically get it. Yes.
How do we do both?
Do you?
We assign the robot to like both players.
You would need to go into, so you could, yes, 100%. You would then need to add more to your robot state controller. You would need to either change this to like a list of game objects or an array of game objects that keeps being added to, or you, if you're just simple like this, create public game object player 1, player 2 as it, and then you would just double your code to a degree, but you could also then have it do different things depending upon which player's interacting with it. So there is it's easy enough to put that through. It then just depends upon how complicated you want to make the actions and the transitions and stuff from that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so then you would just duplicate this code and you'd run basically the same code twice. All right. We're going to add some movement now to our split screen controller. So we're going to go back up to the top. We're going to add using Unity Engine dot input system, because that's where we're getting all of our data coming in through. And then we're going to add some variables. We'll add a private float. We'll call it move speed. We could set these to serialized fields if we wanted to be able to just go in and make changes there. Just for this example, we're just going to have it be everybody moves at 5. We're going to add a private vector 3. This is similar to what we did previously. We're going to add a movement direction. And then as we had also done previously, we're going to do a public input action reference. And we're going to call this movement P1. We're going to do the same damn thing for P2. I love the IntelliSense. And then we're going to do one final one, a public input action asset. And we're going to call that player 2, and I'm just going to call it the IAA, the input action asset. The only way that, I won't tell you how many video tutorials I watched that none of them actually solved the problem. So I spent hours trying to figure out how do we actually get this work, because everything that I was playing with that people were like, this works, no problem, was great at making both controls. I could get jump to work fine, but when it came to actually getting the movement, one controller always controlled both. So what I figured out in a workaround is we're going to actually assign player 2 their own input action assets, which we'll get into that in a bit. All right, we're going to add a public void on move, right? Because we have move. It might try and do something else like it always does. On move is one of our input actions, right? So we have the ability to say on move. So when the joystick is moving, we have that popping up. With this, we're going to once again add a switch statement. And this is going to be once again player number. We need to be able to say, hey, this is, isn't this neat? We're going to add those in. Really? Okay. So as we did before, you're going to have a case 0. Remember, after cases, it's a colon, not semicolon. We're going to do movement direction is equal to movement P1 action read value, and that's bringing in a vector 2. No, that. And we're going to put a break in there. So it's going to read what's coming in from what we will eventually set as controller 1 for obviously player 1. So then case 1, which is player 2, we're going to also do movement direction, but this time it's movement player 2 action read value vector 2. And we'll break. So if it's getting input from the left joystick, it's going to go through and set it up and check the on move. And this is where we need our updates. So if we scroll down to our update function, we're going to say that this game object, no, not game star, this game, bless you, object. We're going to transform it. We're going to translate it. So we're going to move it vector 3 forward. And that's going to be times our movement direction in the Y, so up and down on the joystick, times our move speed. Times, so many times, time dot delta time. Whew, we made it. So this is going to, our on move is going to set what the move direction is based on whether you're player 1 or 2, what movement you're putting in through the left stick, which once again, vector 2, up, down, just Y and X. So we're going to set that, and then we're going to do another translate. So this is going to be basically the same. Form translates. But we're going to do, instead of a forward, we're going to do a right. Movement direction, this time it's X, right? So we're going our side-to-side movements. It's going to once again be by the move speed. You could set a different move speed if you wanted for like forward or backwards or strafing, right? You can set those different ones. We're just going to keep it all the same for simplicity's sake. And then it's going to be times time.delta time. So our strafing is going to, so we had previously a rotation here. Now we're just going to go ahead and strafe. So you're going to be forward, backwards, left, right, strafing. And then in place player, player 1 is going to go ahead and get all of the, it's going to use the control setup that we set up previously. We're going to, in just a minute, set up a new player controller input system for just player 2. So what we need to do because of that, on the case 1, in our player placement, we need to say this game object, get component, player input. So our player input system is where we put what controls we're using. And we're going to say the actions is equal to our player 2 IAA. So we're going to give player 2 their own completely owned control input system. This was the only way I could get it to work that would actually have player 2's controls work for player 2 and not player 1 only. So this gives us that. And then I did notice in our original code that our jump was a little, you could get a double jump in there. You could hit that jump again before it turns to false. So what we're going to add to this one, we're going to do a private void on collision enter. And we're going to say if it is jumping. Oh, did I not set a? We're going to add a variable first. We're going to add a boolean. Private bool is jumping. This is once again going to be false because we don't start jumping. And then we can say is jumping if collision dot collider name equals floor that one is jumping is false. So now we're actually checking. You don't get to jump again unless the player has actually collided with the floor. And so what we can do in on jump, we're going to go ahead and finish filling this out. If the game's not started, we want to place the player. So we're going to run place player at that point, which then comes through and says game is started is true. And we want to then do an else. We're going to, where did that go? I grab it from my other one. That's all right. I left it out. That's fair. We're just going to add this real quick. We just need this. So after you've placed the player, now every time we hit the A button, we're going into jump. So we're going to say as long as jumping is not, or as long as we're not jumping, so jumping equals is jumping is false. We're going to set is jumping to true. And then we're going to add this too. I apparently left this out of my notes from yesterday. We're gonna set it up to jump. It's gonna use the add force because we have a rigid body attached to it. So we're gonna do it by jump force. So we'll add a variable, which is a vector 3. We're calling it jump force. And it's just a new vector 0, 5, 0. If you wanted a stronger jump, you would just change that 5 to a 10, a 20, 100, whatever you want it to be. What? Yeah, private vector 3 for jump force. Yep. Let me know when you're ready.
So could you scroll back up
To the variable.
Transport and translate.
It's going to be in our update. Anybody still need a little bit more time? All right, so that covers everything that we had kind of basically done previously, but we did add that look functionality now. So we want to add that in. So we're going to go ahead and add a few more variables because I love adding variables. We're going to do a private float rotation speed. Notice that rotation goes slow, so we're going to bump it up to 25. Try to make it a little bit quicker. We're going to have a private, it's a vector 3, and this is going to be our look direction. And as we did previously, we're going to do a public input action reference. And we're going to do look P1 and look P2. This is where we're going to check if we're looking around. We're going to add, we can just add it above the on move, a public void on look. Let's you. This, as we did on our on move, we're going to also use a switch statement. Also player number. All right, and as we've done before, case 0 is our player 1. This is just going to say, oh, it's got to be a colon. Our look direction is going to be look P1, action, read value, vector 2. And then we can just do our break on that. And literally the same thing here for case 1. Look direction. No. And is going to be now look P2, action, read value vector 2, break. So that's going to now say, okay, which direction are we looking in? And to put it all the way through, we now do what we did previously in our update. We're just going to add another, oops, come on. This game object, transform. This time it's going to be rotate though, because we're just going to be looking around. This is vector 3 up is what we're rotating around the y-axis. We're multiplying it by the look direction. Dot x. And our rotation speed. And as previous, time dot delta time. So this is going to allow us now to look around, especially in a split screen version, right? It's going to be really helpful to know and move your character around. You're not just top down, potentially in a co-op. So we're gonna have that there. Anybody need more time on the scripts? Okay. That was fixed when we went into our robot code. And so now we've given it a player, so you should not be getting those errors any longer. Okay, give me just a minute. So robot, you need to add to your robot state controller at the very bottom. It doesn't matter, but I put it at the very bottom, the public void set player. Do you have that one? Okay, that's fine. We're gonna go. There are multiple spots, and then robot sleeping. Check your check transitions and make sure it's the same as this. Okay. So and then robot working, check the check transitions again. Okay, and then in your split player controller, you should have, in case 0, you should have this line. Game object dot find body get component robot state controller set player. Okay, I'll have to come and look at it in just a couple minutes because it's not going to ruin the gameplay. That's just connecting it for multiplayer. So once we have everybody ready to move on, other than the robot issue. Yeah, TIAA. So it's the same name as, no, sorry, it's player 2 IAA. As long as you have it, it doesn't matter. It's a variable name. As long as yours match between the two, you're good to go. All right. So what we want to do is now come back out. Our code is quote done. We're going to come to our prefabs, to our split player prefab. And we want to make sure that we've attached our split player controller. And we want to now attach, so we can come in here. There's a couple ways of doing it. Now that we're going to be actually tracking two different, we need to do that first. Hold on. So then what you want to do is go to your assets. Select your My Controls where we put in all of our new look controls. Everything's there. Attach our gamepad. Control D to duplicate. And change now that one to the new one to player to controller. So the My Controls is where you added your look, your gamepad, everything there. So what we're just doing is duplicating that controller input. So once again, select the My Controls, Control D to duplicate, and then rename the new one player to controller. Once we have that, we can come to our prefabs, open our split player prefab. It gets a little tricky to figure out what's what, because remember what we want to do is attach the input action. So we can pull these up, but they all say player and there's 2 or 3 of each now. You can figure it out by clicking on it and it's going to tell you which input action it's attached to. But that's kind of a waste of time. So if we just open up our assets again, we expand our My Controls and our player 2 controller, we can just drag and drop. So we can add player move from My Controls to the top one, because that's player 1, player look to player 1 look. Then we've got move on player 2 to movement P2, player look on player 2 controller to look P2. And we just drag the whole entire player 2 controller to the player 2 IIA. So we connect those all together. Yeah.
Something set up for jumping.
Yes, but jump is automatic. Jump, yeah, jump doesn't. It's just it's a jump, or you hit the A button or you didn't hit the A button. There's no real data coming through.
Okay.
So as long as there's no data coming through any of the buttons that you have, we won't actually have to connect it through this way. That's where just having the on jump automatically calls that part of the function, which makes it so much nicer than having to drag every single one over, especially if it's just a button push. All right. Save this. I'm going to go ahead and turn the canvas off because it's just kind of in the way and it doesn't really do anything anymore at the moment. So if we hit play, we've got our 2 controllers plugged in. I hit A on the first controller. I now have a my player. It jumps. It moves around. It looks around. Okay, hold on just a second. Come over in a minute. Now if I hit A on the second controller, I get player 2, which is now red. It moves around. It looks around, so I can now rotate around and look at the second player, and it still jumps. Okay, I'm going to do one last thing, and then I'll come and take a look real quick. We'll take a short break in just a moment. The one thing, though, is that we might not want the robot to just walk through our player. That might get a little awkward if it's moving. So what we can just do is go to our prefab, our split player. I'm going to minimize these because they're not necessary at the moment. If we add the component, what is it? It's nav mesh obstacle, I believe. Let me double check. Yep, so if we add a nav mesh obstacle, we check the carve, and we uncheck the carve only stationary. We save that. Now, when we play, we get the little white box which shows, hey buddy, you can't come through this way. It can pass really damn close, but it's not going to just be able to run right through you to get there. And it shows up on our other one as well. All right, let's go ahead. So that's the end of split screen multiplayer. Let's go ahead and take just a short 10-minute break, and then we'll come back. We'll hit the co-op, which is much faster because we are able to use almost everything that we've done so far. We're just changing a few little things and going to play with the camera. So be back at 10:45. If you have questions.
I was just gonna say, can I maybe like take a picture of the scripts?
Sure. Yeah. Or come up and just move to the ones you know.
Balloons for air, wow for Jack.
Yep, that's correct.
That's how we're doing it.
Correct.
Are you trying to get it to rotate to work?
I accidentally put D-pad instead. So I was just fixing it because it works. I've seen it. Just needed to don't break anything. It's okay. I'll go back to now. Crazy crap.
I would never. Okay,
I have a total of like 2 minutes in the meeting, so.
I believe so. It should be checking to make sure that the player is not null. We'll pull it up a second.
sorry.
No, you good?
N-
Or make sure you get your.
I think.
You said it was a sleeping one?
Yeah. Oh, it's not just that.
That's what I'm doing.
Sorry, dyslexia makes it hard
Oh,
to
no worries.
follow along live.
If you ever need these to go, just send me an email and I'll just send you the photos. That's the easy way to do it. But you got to remind her
Yeah.
because I'll forget. But yeah, 100%.
Yeah, doing my best to follow along as well as I can.
John, you said the choice is not the person that is my character like
Yeah, with you, my mouth has significantly bigger. It's choppy.
I have a big
Honestly, how well applied. This thing is light as fuck. Yeah, I bet.
Good.
Great air. Yeah.
I think I got this one right.
Like this one's like
Really?
one star. I'm not sure.
You have that.
Yeah, that's not bad. That's only like my only deal with it, yeah, it's like
And I fixed the error, but like I still got like this.
where it doesn't have what button. I don't know. I think it's desktop dongle, so it's wireless speakers. So whenever I charge it, I just yeah.
Because you need first to run. Well, go to your Jefferson. No,
After class, I think it's this.
yeah, sorry.
I think I like the
Started. Right.
I'm until 12:40. That would really like to make sure that everything is merged and then
I think I had most of it right.
No worries.
Half the time when something's not working, it's just, oh, you misspelled something.
Right. That it does tend to be the
click Sierra, my guy loads in, but he's still not moving.
Be right there in a second. No, it's not Sean. Stop spamming me. Jesus Christ. There's the police player one. I'll just double check.
Nope.
Should we want to do our split screen or co-op? I mean, hopefully, we should have problems with it, right? So that we can
Well, yeah, but I assume you'll tell me.
figure it out and put it. And a new phone. What color? Black. Did it go to the Canadian desert? No,
Yeah.
I thought about this.
I'm not very good. I would have lost already if it's top.
We have black in the deserts. And they're like, you sure? And I'm like, yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, but I just want the phone. I'm gonna be for it. Yeah, here's more. Yeah, the 15 But I haven't even. Oh. My lunch for the next 5 months is right here. My lunch is like right here in the budget. What's on the left? Yeah, well, I just added storage and it's old. It was also my last chance to like be able to trade an iPhone in for money.
Or
You guys can have it. My thing was like, not to sound weird. Too big. No, I get sick. It was way too big. Like if I was okay, like this one, I could kind of like I could tip my head, but the other one, to be able to use it. Yeah, you know.
I loved it when the phones were like,
It's just a little one.
but it's also so weird to be like,
Jackie for having it fast and camera's good and hella storage. I love that.
physicists and I considered buying myself
Oh yeah. No,
I can be
honestly, like I don't really care. Like, yeah, I'm not like a, I care if it's new or anything like that. I just, I'm an impulse buyer. Oh, I'm like,
my dad goes, hey, I'm getting this phone. I'm gonna come to you. You want to get the phone? And my dad goes,
oh yeah.
when did I ever see them? But I think the one before this was an owl.
Hey, it is a little bit. So what's that one?
15. It's a big jump.
Okay, I remember
My
your
life is kind
iPhone
of right.
7 then.
I've had wizard goes kind of right. This one wizard monkey is equivalent to all of my other top plus druids.
I think I remember because I remember like
I didn't
about
realize top
Snapchat.
had wizard. I always thought middle
Yeah,
path was
yeah.
Also, I do love having your
I can say no. I'm just curious. So I've watched the tutorial. The only other monkey you want to do that with is like.
Where's what?
Take off the game off there. Place and slider not.
I do want to sit down and do it though.
but you're sticking with your.
power, but it
Right.
also makes sense.
I'm still gonna try. Like, I'm gonna just.
Well, as long as you put it next to
It's worth a
the
shot.
shot.
No, it still gets the ability for guards, yes.
Yeah,
It's
but
just
it's
less
not
robot.
Well, yeah. And you want to make it nice. $20.
$100 thing.
They just have it to be it was essentially a
It's okay. I'm putting Buccaneer. Harry.
it was essentially
Yep.
yeah, which is nice because there's it's too clear.
I don't even know what that means.
You didn't choose anything you were registered to vote yet, like anything you want. Well, you chose to register to stop for government choosing so that you're outside. Or vote.
Well, he didn't let us leave lunch. If you remember correctly. Also, we just kind of just get told.
We also gave us extra. Right?
So you were health last
Yeah,
With incentive.
he gave us insights.
Took government your senior year, I'm guessing.
No, we took it our junior year, and then we hung out in his class in lunch.
Yeah, his
And then
class
that's like,
we didn't hang out.
yeah, government was spiritual.
That's when we had the
Granted, it was awful because for me that was the 2016 election.
yeah.
That was so rough. Granted, I will say, Anya, we didn't really get a full like choice, even though we weren't technically. I wasn't 18 yet, so I was like, "Wait, what's your church? Why should I be doing this? Because like I'm not eligible to vote yet." It's like, "Oh, don't worry. When I send it in, they'll wait." And then when you turn 18, you'll be registered. It's like, you're not getting out. It's like, oh, okay. Look, Mr. Jones, I remember the election was not 18 yet.
Like, what's the point? Just
Yeah.
And he was like, yes.
It's like, so that's why you're doing it.
That's why you're doing
because
it.
I want you to be registered to vote.
I know.
Oh, but
Like,
okay. Yeah, Mr. Church,
You got it.
Class and I am awesome coming in teacher. Best name for a teacher also to have. You know, being I don't remember what my government teacher's name was, except I do remember that she misspelled my name every time, and he spelled it a different way every single time. It was honestly kind of impressive.
They almost was kind of aggressive. Otherwise.
Except she never called me Anya. She always called me by my legal name. I'm like,
You
why
have
is
a
it
bed.
this? Why are you doing
I
this?
really saw my
I do go to that. And I'm like, it should have been Berlin. Like, have a bed. Quite
sharing.
Anastasia is a lot easier on it. Funnily enough. Even though it's twice the amount of letters.
It's a lot more than school.
But that's at least a name.
Back to
Go.
very true.
I don't know how to think
People
about
know
it.
that thing about one.
Patience, it's like a song and a half. So it's like right by the down. Yeah, so I'm thinking about like.
I think so. I don't have a phone.
So that wasn't on my list, but there is Coop. I don't. That's what I'm gonna brainstorm. Now we need more system is engineered, or it's a good way to do it.
Yeah. Or the light.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not gonna lie. I'm hyped, but it's with it individual.
Cylinder.
Anyways, but I'm so hyped about the commercial though.
Yeah. There's a thing.
Cause like.
I'm trying to like figure out how how to do it in the real world so that way I can put it into the game. Like, is it gonna be you're standing there and you have, I know we mentioned what
Yeah.
my deep dark and I was like, is it like an etch a sketch?
Yeah,
But X and Y.
yeah, it was an X and Y.
Okay.
Yeah.
How are we gonna have
My job is being
the,
an animator.
the person controlling the
That's good. That's
Etch a
delicious.
Sketch spotlight?
I think you just I'm
Good.
20.
We'll
That is
get
good.
them back in.
Well, I was thinking they would stand on like an elevated position,
Okay.
and then they would just look down on the mayor.
Yeah.
That was my idea.
I could make the elevated
Okay.
position. I was going to grab this, but I also
Joke.
thought it was going to be we were going to like as soon as they interact with certain symbols, it was going to change their player camera.
That was my other idea. Is it would change the player camera to be like a top-down view
Yeah.
or something, and so they can see like
Everything.
where the enemy is,
Yeah.
where all of the other lights on
Nice.
their light is. Cowboy winter as a
That's like
was
the
their
most recent
out in the
one
cold.
with the yellow, like whiz
One just
Yeah, my commitment.
I think it's
something. Oh, you think about Deadpool versus Wolverine?
The cow.
This is
The
my
Quizzer.
favorite. I've been calling him Cowboy because it's just
No,
Cowboy
He's
candy.
a show.
the Quizzer.
Favorite spell is called
They're doing a reboot of
Just
the Wizard.
Sean.
I had
It's just
Oh, the Thunderman.
which is cool.
Is it busy?
All right, we're gonna real quick continue on with the co-op version, so we can get done with that, and I can get you some time in your groups. Although we're gonna probably run out of time real quick. So if we come over and we take what we just did, so we take our split player, if we go to our scenes, and we take our co-op scene, duplicate it again. We're going to call this one, oh, not co-op scene. You want your multiplayer scene, because that's one we just did. So take your multiplayer scene, duplicate it. So in your scenes folder, you should have the multiplayer scene that we created. Duplicate it and call it co-op scene. Or do you already have a co-op scene? If you don't have it already, duplicate your multiplayer scene. Make it co-op scene. We want to then, as we had previously, open up the co-op player controller scripts that we created earlier. We're going to add, as we did before, using Unity Engine .input system. And then we're going to go ahead and go over to our split player controller. And we're going to highlight everything up in the code. And we're going to copy and paste it into our co-op player controller. Because most of this we're going to reuse. We're going to change a few things. But for the majority of this, why retype everything in? So now that we've got that, what we're just going to do is we're going to pop out. We're going to go to our prefab. Yeah, please always save your scripts. Go to prefab. We're going to go to our co-op player, which you should have there. And then in our co-op player, what we're going to do is we're going to once again remove the player controller. player controller script because we don't need that one anymore. And instead, we're going to add our co-op player controller script, which should once again look very familiar. We're going to do what we did previously. Go ahead and go through and connect everything to that player controller script. So I'm going to take over the two-player controller. I'm going to take my movement for player 1 and my look for player 1, my move for player 2, and my look for player 2. So we have everything there. Go ahead and save. We need to remember to turn off the auto switch, and we'll set our default theme back to gamepad. So this should still be under the My Controls, gamepad, turn off auto switch. It should be set to player. And there should be no camera, so we should be good with that. From there, we're going to bump over to our player manager, and we're just going to turn off enable split screen because we're not playing split screen anymore, right? This is just in one, and we're going to go ahead in player manager, player input manager, turn off enable split screen. What?
Did you stick your previous save? I did not.
All right, so if you player manager, make sure you have the player input manager attached to it. Should be join players, enable, limit to 2, turn off split screen. We don't have a camera. Our players don't have a camera because we're not going to be doing a first person with this. Or not first person, but not a split screen. So we're going to now need to add a camera. So if we right click in our hierarchy, we can just, a camera, yay, it's amazing. And then we'll go through, and then the transform for the camera, we're going to set it to 0, 15, 0, and then change our X rotation to 90. So we're pointing straight down. Yeah, add a camera. And then change its position to 0, 15, 0, and its rotation to 90, 0, 0. So it's looking down. So now we want to, basically what we're just doing for the rest of this is we can say we're seeing, we're going to create a new code. So a new script. We're going to call it create C# script. We're going to call it co-op camera controller. I'm naming my one because I already have one once again. So co-op camera controllers are scripts. So at the start of the game, we're just going to open up that script. We're going to need a variable for here. That's going to be a private, an integer. And once again, we want to know the number of players because what we want to do is number of players. If there's no players, it doesn't matter. Just leave the camera at the 0, 15, 0. If there's just one player, we want to go ahead and have the camera basically follow that player around. And then if there's 2 players, we want the camera to be in the middle of the 2 players and then changing height depending upon how close or far they are away. So what we're going to do first is just do the tracking for Once again, knowing how many players there are. In our update function, we're going to build our switch. And then once again, this is going to be based on the number of players. Oh, when it does it first, it's so nice. Okay. We're going to have a case. We're not going to have a case 0 this time because we want to know case 0, it's just there. It's waiting for something to happen. So case 0 doesn't matter. We want case 1, so there's got to be at least a player. Remember colon for these. We're just going to put in the formatting for this, so then a break, and then a case 2, and a break. So if there's 1 player, we're going to do this. If there's 2 players, we're going to do something different. And then we're going to add another function. This can be a public void add player. And for this, we need to add the game object, basically requiring a game object to be passed in. So that we can know what players there are, right? Like, it doesn't really do us much good if we don't know what players there are. And we're going to, forgot to add that to it. We're going to go ahead and add a private, another 2 variables. We're going to add a private game object. We'll just call them player 1 and a private game object player 2. So then what we can do in our add player, if the number of players equals 0, player 1 is going to be equal to P. So we're going to take the player that comes in and say, yeah, you're player 1. And since we only have 2, we're just going to do an else if number of players equals 1. We could have done this with a switch. We're just changing it up. Player 2 equals P. And then we want to update our number of players. Number of players plus plus, semicolon. So with this, we need to come back to our, well, yeah, come back to, we'll save that, come back to our co-op player controller. And then in our place player, right above our game started equals true, we're going to add in one more line. We're going to say game object dot find. We're looking for the camera in this case. Remember capital C for your camera. Get component. Our co-op camera controller. Add player, and we're going to once again pass in this game object. So when this spawn, it's going to tell the camera controller, that's player 1. Maybe you should pay attention to them. Or, you're player 2. Cool. We need to know that. All right. And then we'll save this. We're going to come back over to the camera controller. We're just going to start with the 1 player example just to have. So all we need to do with this is say that the transform in case 1 for 1 single player, the transform position of the camera is a new vector 3. And we're going to say it's player 1 transform position X. We're going to keep the height at 15. And then player 1, transform, position Z. So that's going to set the height at 15 because that's just what we want it to be. That gives enough view, in my opinion, for this case. If you want to change it, that can be on you. But then it sets the X and Z of it. So it's going to basically hover it directly over player 1. So if we save this, we come back to our game. We hit play. I grab a controller. I spawn in. And of course it doesn't go over it. Oh, it's always helpful to, on your camera game object, to add the code you just wrote. I mean, you know, it should know, right? So go ahead and save that again. And now if we hit play, it still doesn't do it. Go up, camera, controller 1. Just a moment. Let's bring in my camera controller. Am I getting an error? No errors. That's good, I guess. That's fine. Player 1 transform player. Transform. Okay, I'll do this real quick. Oh. It helps to switch because we copied it over. Our current player prefab is the split player one. We need to go ahead and, or not player one, split player for y'all. You need to go ahead and switch that to your co-op player for the player manager. So now when we hit play, it's bringing in the right thing and it's, there we go. Now it's just following us around. Yay, woo! Which if we bring in another player, you should be able to drag your co-op player to the player prefab. But now, because we have the camera just attached to the one player, player 2 is going to have a really hard time playing. So let's make it easier for player 2 to play. If we go back to our scripts for our camera controller, we're going to, in our update, put in a whole bunch of code. In case 2, we are going to add a vector 3. We're going to call it midpoint. It's going to equal player 1. It's going to equal parentheses, player 1 transform position plus player 2 transform position, And then we're going to divide that by 2. So we're taking those two together, add them together, divide by 2 gets us the middle point. We also want to have a float player distance because we're going to need to raise that camera up the further the players are apart from each other. So player distance is equal to a vector 3 dot distance. And we're going to say player 1 transform position, not midpoint, position, and comma player 2 transform position. So we want to know how far is it from player 1 to player 2. It comes out as an absolute, so you don't have to worry about which way it's going. Then we're going to check and see if player distance is less than or equal to 10. In my mind, if it's less than or equal to 10, we're just going to keep the camera point. We're going to, oh, hold on. Let me, because I did this later. We're going to real quick come up and add 2 variables. We'll do them both at the same time. One of them is going to be a private vector 3, and we're going to call this camera point. And then we're also going to do a private float camera speed, and we'll just set that to 10 for the moment. All right, back down to our case 2. So we're going to now use our new camera point variable. So camera point for this is just going to be a new vector 3, and we want the midpoint for the x. So midpoint.x, we're going to save it at 15 because I felt like that was a good height for that. And then midpoint.z to get, basically we're going to place that camera right in between the players, but keep it at the same height. So they're close enough. We don't want to lower the camera any further. We're going to keep it there. Then else if player distance is greater than or equal to 130, when I went and played it, I felt like, yeah, that's a good distance between the two. We're going to go ahead and say that camera point is equal to a new vector 3. Ooh, gotta spell new right. Vector 3, once again, midpoint dot x. And then I felt that full distance, 75, was a good height. And midpoint dot z. So if they're as far apart as basically they can go on the playing field, the camera goes to its max height.
Is that 30 or 130?
So this one's 130, and then 75 for the height. And then one last one. So if anything else, if they're any number between 10 and 130, we're going to go ahead and say that we're going to create just a float for here. We're going to call it camera height. And that is equal to, we're going to do 3 brackets, player distance minus 10 divided by 120 times 50 plus 15. I played with some weird math and numbers to get to this. You're just going to have to play with it to figure out how you do that, what the best calculation is for you. And so we now have what that height should be based upon the distance of the players. And so now we can just do our camera point is equal to a new vector 3. And this is going to be like we did before, midpoint.x. Now it's camera height and midpoint.z. The last thing that we need to do is let me just double check that I put it where I think I put it. Yep, perfect. And then we're going to go ahead and before our break, we're going to do transform position. So this is transforming the position of the camera, a vector 3. Now we're going to use a move towards. So we're going to put in our current position, transform.position, our camera point. So where we should be going to, we're going to add in our camera speed, and we're doing a time dot delta time. So now as we move around and both players move around, the camera, if they're between that 10 and 130, that camera is going to change its height. All right, as long as everything went according to plan, holds breath, cross fingers, we should be able to hit play. Player 1, once again, right, it's still just falling around because there's just a player there. I move player 2 in. The camera automatically moved towards it. It moved closer. It doesn't matter. It keeps it to the height. But now, as we go further and further away, the camera continues to raise up. It's not perfect because it's in the small. But as you can see, even though we're super far apart, you still now have the two players just barely visible. In my little tiny screen, it's going to show up better if this is full screen. And so now you've got the ability to do, for your multiplayer, your choice, split screen or co-op, single screen. Questions? I will post the code for these just because I know there was a lot, and I know some people got a little lost in it, so I will go ahead and post the C# scripts for this. Any questions? Yeah. Sure, so you'd have to go back through and put in all the robot code that we did in the previous one. Because you copied over the screen one.
I need someone to validate my pull request.
You'll have to give me a minute.
The pressure to hit.
Any other questions?
She crashed. I'm not sure if I
Cool. So we've got, I think, about almost 30 minutes left. Go ahead and get into your multiplayer game groups and spend the last bit of the class
That's those guys.
figuring out what. If you don't know already what you're doing, that would be a really great time to figure out and maybe figure out which one of these you want to go with.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate that.
Any other questions before I let you go?
I see some things, but nothing like, okay, I'm gonna.
Chill Lucas.
All right,
I agree.
go ahead and get your scripts for last front of the class.
That is a good question.
I'm gonna test this is the after that, I technically don't have a task anymore.
Camera part like we have.
I don't have a task until the enough of the base is completed for me to hook up the spider.
Yeah.
So,
I know.
well, I also require deployment. Yeah, I'm dependent on both of you. Like, will be momentarily. Well, I guess suffice it to say, most of what I can do for the spider shouldn't happen until after the base. Because, like, its state machine works, it has this set, it has the AI states that it needs. It'll just be tweaking them based off of the maze, how the light works, and all this stuff. So, at this point, I just need something to do.
Hopefully by the end of the year.
At this point, I can. I will walk.
You survived another rotation.
We had a fun conversation about birthdays. Wait, why me? What's your favorite? Look at Sure. Sure.
You stared like close to the abyss. Are you okay?
It happens when you turn 23. It happens. I'm very tired.
Okay, okay. Okay, you can go home. You already got our number.
Bottle of rum in the closet. So I did get you so real. I'm going home tomorrow. True. Hey, you hungover? No one's gonna tell. I didn't hear that just now. You're good. I didn't hear anything. Nothing happened. It's fine. I don't even know you. It's fine. It's not confirmed. I won't know unless I go over to your house. And I'm going to, because I'm also busy tomorrow. No. I have an appointment and I have to teach the freshmen. Actually, I'm just having to get a hair equipment. Well, I'm still doing that. It just happened to also be the day I was teaching the freshmen, which I didn't know when I scheduled the appointment with your mom. And now I can't remember. So Drew's teaching similar to what I did last night. He's awkward now. But I won't be there. It wasn't that bad last night, to be honest. Like Zach was really able to help me. Completely fine. Luckily, the things that I'm teaching them are so simple that most of what I was doing was just writing it to this where I was like, all right, we're adding a double jump and we're adding a dash. Let's think about what components might be necessary to get that done. And so, because I asked them to think about like, well, we already set grounding as a like functionality for the jump to prevent you from being able to jump infinite times. So how do we redo that but lock it to two? And then, with the dash, it was I introduced curves. And that's all I suggested they use it for. Getting the interaction set up and what? Stop. It shouldn't be all that hard. I just yeah.
By the way, if
I don't know the exact
the interacts, the way the interacts are set up right now, they're very bare bones. They don't have specific things to do. So if you need me to program something with the interacts,
I want to be
I want to set it up so that like timer doesn't activate until they might actually go to start.
yeah.
And then it can run on the oh, you know what I need to do?
So I would
That'll be connected to this.
one of the two working.
So this is really the thing. Well, the other thing still have to figure out is gonna yeah, just message me. Yeah. It's just not
I should probably turn off my recording.
Work way better on this one.